I'm so excited to be here. Forgive this indulgence, but let me illustrate why I'm excited. I was, believe it or not, at the Nobel Forum in Stockholm in early December. I hasten to add there's no correlation between being asked to speak in the Nobel Forum and winning the prize. They made that very clear, that if I was saying yes, there was no implied promise. And so I gave my speech and we participated. And then they said, are you looking forward to the white tie banquet tomorrow? And I said, well, actually, no, I'm not going. Why not? I'm going to Taunton. Taunton? Where's that? I said, it's in Somerset. Why are you going to Taunton? Because it's a Marmot place. I'd much rather be in a Marmot place than at a white tie banquet. And when I look at everybody gathered here, I'm extra excited. Now, if you're feeling inspired and energized by that lovely testament to Newcastle, I fill the wet blanket slot. I've got bad news, but I hope that we'll finish on a positive note. The opening line to my book, The Health Gap, was why treat people and send them back to the conditions that made them sick. My book, The Health Gap, particularly at time of a pandemic, we think a great deal about our National Health Service, and by golly, do we need to. But my concern is with the conditions that make us sick, not what happens when we get sick, where we need the health service. And as Alice said, in the 2010 Marmot Review, and again, Health Equity in England, the Marmot Review 10 years on, we had initially 6 domains of recommendations to reduce health inequalities and improve health. Give every child the best start in life, education and lifelong learning, employment and working conditions. Number 4, good heavens, people should have enough to eat. They should have the minimum income necessary for a healthy life. Number 5, healthy and sustainable places in which to live and work. And we've done a great deal over the years now on housing, part of that. Number 6, taking a social determinants approach to prevention. That means you don't wag your finger and say, eat healthily or don't booze or whatever. You recognize the social constraints on behaviors. Number 7 and 8 that we've added tackle discrimination, racism and their consequences. And 8, pursue environmental sustainability and health equity together. I work on the assumption that health is a good measure of how well we're doing as a society. And we're doing badly. This is life expectancy for women and for men. We've taken it back to 1999. I could take it back to 1929. Life expectancy was improving about 1 year every 4 years. 6 hours every 24 hours. If you're here from 10:30 to 4:30, your life expectancy would be as long at the end of it as it was at the beginning. In fact, it could be longer if you learned something and enhanced your will. But that's what was going on for 100 years. Life expectancy improving 1 year every 4 years, and in 2010 it stopped. And the rate of improvement slowed dramatically. And then, first 3 years of the pandemic, it declined. We had a 14-year period where life expectancy did not improve at all. I don't know of another period in peacetime of 14 years where life expectancy failed to improve. Think about it. We all grew up with the promise that life would keep getting better. I think about my parents. If you ask them, will your children have a better life? Yeah, of course. You know, post-war, welfare state, the National Health Service, expansion of education, things are getting better and health would improve. And for 14 years, health did not improve. I maintain the fiction that I'm not party political. So what I'm showing you is evidence. And the evidence is when the Conservative-led coalition government took office in 2010, things stopped improving and perhaps even got worse. And if we look at Newcastle and England, so Newcastle upon time, trends in life expectancy, that's England women, females, Newcastle, and England men, wow, that's a decline in life expectancy. That's not just leveling off, that's a decline. And the gap, if anything, between the English average and Newcastle got bigger. This is dreadful. I was asked by a journalist this morning, are there any particular challenges for Newcastle? Yep, there it is. And when we look at what happened, fundamental to everything we do is the social gradient in health. If you classify people by where they live, classify where they live by level of deprivation, it's a gradient. The greater the deprivation, the shorter the life expectancy. Look at Newcastle, the northeast, compared with London. If you're rich, it doesn't much matter where in the country you live. Life expectancy is fairly good. In fact, in England, it's not very good by European standards, but still. But the greater the deprivation, the greater the disadvantage of living in the northeast. If you're in the most deprived decile, it's very bad for your health to be in the northeast. Or if you're in the northeast, it's very bad for your health to be in the most deprived decile. The consequences for health of a given level of deprivation is bigger in the northeast than it is in London and the southeast. Now, I listened to this young person, and I'm with him. Surely we would not be here today if our ambition was other than to make Newcastle the best place to live. And that's got to include better health and well-being. This is our challenge. We calculated something that I'd want to do for a long time. People like me commonly refer to the poor health of the poor. I said, let's focus on the good health of the rich. I don't mean, you know, looking at water skiing accidents while on holiday in the Barbados or something. I mean, the least deprived shows us what's possible. And if you make the assumption, which I think is a credible assumption, that the higher mortality of people whose level of deprivation is slightly greater than the best of, that's excess, didn't need to be there. So the mortality of the least deprived 10% shows us what is possible. And anything above that is excess. And because of the gradient, the greater the deprivation, the greater the number of excess deaths. So we calculated over the decade from 2010, how many excess deaths were there linked to deprivation? And the answer is 1 million excess deaths linked to deprivation. Now, deprivation was related to mortality before 2010, but the gradient got steeper. So we calculated how many excess deaths were there in that decade, and the answer was 148,000. Arguably, austerity killed 148,000 people. This is not just an academic debate among economists about policy. This is life and death. Arguably, austerity killed 148,000 people. More in the northeast than in London and the southeast. And if we look at inequalities within Newcastle upon time, the index of multiple deprivation, life expectancy, the greater the deprivation, the shorter the life expectancy. It's a very steep gradient within Newcastle. And healthy life expectancy, so not just how long, but healthy life expectancy, England and Newcastle, Newcastle, I'll get there, England female, Newcastle upon time female, much lower healthy life expectancy, and healthy life expectancy is declining. And there's the males, England and Newcastle upon time. So we're not just talking about length of life, but not only do people in more deprived areas have shorter lives, they live more years of those shorter lives in ill health. Forgive me now if there are any young people here, I'm going to use some rude language. We coined the phrase proportionate universalism in our 2010 review. I was trying to get at the idea of combining universalist policies, which are typical of Nordic countries, the Netherlands, apply to everybody, and typical Anglo-Saxon approach of you target the worst off. The problem with targeting the worst off is if you focus, if this is the gradient, better life expectancy, say better health with less deprivation, if you target only the worst off, you miss the health disadvantage of people who are above that threshold of intervention. So we said universalist policies with effort proportionate to need. What did we get post-2010? At the Institute of Health Equity, we plotted life expectancy for every local authority in England in 2010-12, and then looked at the subsequent reduction in local government spending power up to 2020. The shorter the life expectancy in 2010-12, the steeper the reduction in government spending. The kindest explanation I can give for this is absent-mindedness. They didn't know what they were doing. Well, that's a bit kind, isn't it? It looks pretty systematic. In what moral universe could this be the right thing to do? The unhealthier the community, the more money you take away. And if the funders said, the government said, no, you misunderstand, we weren't targeting sick people, we were targeting poor people. We were taking money away from deprived communities. Ah, that makes it better morally? This is effort inversely proportionate to need. The greater the deprivation, the greater the need. The shorter the life expectancy, the greater the need. The greater the need, the more money was taken away. Could this be an explanation for the slowdown and improvement in life expectancy? The increase in inequalities? The decline in life expectancy and health in the poorest areas? Yeah, I think it could. And if we look at Newcastle upon Tyne, government-funded spending power, wow, nearly 50% reduction from central government. But council tax was allowed to go up after 2015. So that redressed the balance, and the total spending power was, quote, only a reduction of a third. Only a reduction of a third. So that's the challenge we have. But none of you would be here if you thought the challenge was insuperable. If you thought it was all hopeless, you wouldn't have bothered turning up today. If we thought the challenge was hopeless, Jessica and I wouldn't be here. We're here because we think this is a challenge that has to be overcome. So let me briefly remind you of our recommendations. Give every child the best start in life. We think that what I've been showing you is inequity. Forgive me, I could call that horizontal. So inequity now between the north of the country and the south, between more deprived and less deprived. But what about the next generation? What do we bequeath to the next generation? The Gallup organization surveys people in different countries, and they ask, do you think that children today will have a better life than you, about the same, or worse? In the UK, fewer than 1/3 of people think children will have a better life than them. We've messed it up, and we know we've messed it up. To go back to what I said earlier, if you ask my parents, will your children have a better life than you? Of course. You know, they didn't have education. They grew up in poverty. They didn't have all the things that their children's generation had, of course. And you can see in low-income countries, Nigeria, Pakistan, people do think that children will have a better life than them because they are in deep poverty. Now we say we know we've messed it up for the next generation. Good heavens. What about social mobility? One way to think about social mobility, rich parents tend to have rich children when they grow up. Poor parents have poor children. Middle-income parents have middle-income children when they grow up. One question to ask is, at the present rate of social mobility, how many generations would it take for someone in the 10th centile of income to get to the median? In Denmark, it would take 2 generations. In Norway, Finland, and Sweden, it would take 3 generations. In the UK and the US, it would take 5 generations. In Brazil, 9. I was giving a talk to representatives from 53 member states in Europe, and I referred to these data and said, where would you rather be from the point of view of your children, Denmark or Brazil? Because I can tell you we're heading to Brazil. Why? Well, the 2 big influences are the level of inequality. The greater the inequality, the less social mobility, and investment in early childhood. And we're not doing well. If we look at children in relative low-income families in different parts of Newcastle, this is the England, that's Newcastle on Tyne, that's the English average. Wow. 60%, 50% in parts of Newcastle on Tyne. All of these above the English average, and the English average is lamentable. And we can see children with a good level of development at the end of reception, a steep social gradient. So we can see this consequence. And if children don't have a good level of development at the end of reception, they do less well in school, they'll have less good jobs, lower income, and that will be that lack of social mobility that I'm talking about. And it starts early in life. Education, free school meals, these are average attainment 8 scores, and the average. The challenge is to close that gap. Poverty must not be destiny. Employment and working conditions. Employees earning below the living wage by sex. England males, England females. Newcastle upon Tyne is by no means the worst of these core cities, but not great compared with the England average, which in turn is not great. A healthy standard of living for all. I've already referred to child poverty. What about poverty for older people? The England average, older people in poverty. I've put a lot of time and effort into talking about the importance of early life. That does not mean throwing older people on the scrap heap. I have a vested interest in this not happening. Healthy and sustainable places and communities. I mentioned that we've done several reports on housing, including fuel poverty. Fuel poverty has 3 components: the quality of housing, the thermal properties of dwellings. The national government in Britain stopped investing in home insulation after 2012, and we have among the worst in Europe in terms of insulation. Poverty, real incomes did not improve in over 18-year period in the UK. So we were suffering from austerity because it was said that the economy was going to improve. It didn't. We suffered from the austerity and the economy did not improve. Real incomes did not improve. And for reasons that are beyond me, but I have my suspicions, the cost of fuel is higher than the European average. So we've got fuel poverty. And you can see it related to the cost of living. If you're in the top 10% of household income in France, you spend about 6% of your household expenditure on home energy. And if you're in the top 10% in the UK, you spend about 6% of your household expenditure on energy. If you're in the bottom 10% in France, you spend 10% of your household expenditure on energy. If you're in the bottom 10% in the UK, you spend nearly 18% of your household expenditure on energy. That gap between the richest and poorest 10% in the percent of your household budget on energy, that gap is bigger in the UK than in any other Western European country. The UK is not a good place to be poor. And that means cold homes. And that means if you want to heat your home, you may not eat very healthily. And fuel poverty estimates vary enormously within Newcastle upon Tyne. You can see dramatic differences. Households in temporary accommodations, Newcastle looks much better than many of the other core cities, but it's still a national scandal. the number of people in temporary accommodation. If you sat down to devise a living arrangement that would damage children's health and well-being, it would be temporary accommodation that was cold. And ill health prevention, well, you're doing much better than others on overweight and obesity, nearly at the top of the core cities. 2/3 of people in Newcastle are overweight or obese. And this is not simply a matter of behaving badly. It relates to the constraints that I talked about. Deaths from drug misuse. Tackle racism, discrimination in their outcomes, and pursue environmentals. There's a lot I can say about these, but if you look at carbon dioxide emissions, high in Newcastle, high in England, we now know from the President of the United States that global warming is, and I quote, a hoax. I told you I was the wet blanket slot. The second most common question I get asked is, why aren't you depressed? The most common question I get asked is, what's the most common question you get asked? But that's a different point. I'm not depressed because of everybody here, because of what we've been doing in 50 Marmot places across the United Kingdom. Coventry was the first. They declared themselves a Marmot City. Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Merseyside, all across the country. Gwent in Wales. I was a bit embarrassed. I was chairing a colloquium of senior Canadian visitors in UK that was supposed to be in Cardiff, and they said, could I come a day early? And I hadn't organised it. I said, yeah. And they took us to Torven in Gwent, this post-mining community. Welcome to Torven, a Marmot community. I was hiding under the table with embarrassment of what our Canadian visitors would make of this. They loved it. Here was this local community absolutely committed to making a difference, not bemoaning their post-industrial, post-mining past, but young people showing us around the town. This is where the men's choir is, and this was the co-op, and that's the chapel, and this lovely, absolutely terrific. And the Canadians loved it. I loved it, because it's people saying, we can make a difference. We can really do this. Legal & General, the big insurance company, approached us and said, what could business do? So we produced a report, The Business of Health Equity, the Marmot Review for Industry, and we said 3 things. Good employment, including real living wage. Number 2, goods and services. If you're the tobacco industry, we can't work with you. If you're the food industry, which side are you on? And 3, impact on the community, environment, social responsibility. And healthcare organisations can do it. We're working with the East London Foundation Trust, and they said, hey, we like your business report. We can do it as a public sector organisation. A training and employment provider, our service users, and the wider Luton community. We've got testaments from all over of what it means to be a Marmot place. They love it. It gives them a sense of purpose. None say the cuts from central government have been brutal, there's nothing we can do. I don't know if he regrets this or not, but when Keir Starmer was leader of the opposition and launched his health mission, they put out a technical appendix to his mission, and on page 12, I'm sure you've all read page 12, the technical appendix of the Labour's health mission, they said the next Labour government will amplify the approach of Marmot cities like Greater Manchester by making England a Marmot country. We've offered to help. I spoke to the Welsh Minister of Health last week. He said, we will make Wales a Marmot nation. I've spent the last 2 days in Scotland, launching 3 Marmot places in Scotland, working with the Scottish government. I was in Northern Ireland, meeting their health minister, and I was thinking there's one more of the 4 home nations that we've got to sign up. Joe Stiglitz, I'm co-chairing a global council on inequality, AIDS, and pandemics with Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist. And his latest book, The Road to Freedom, he chose the title. The era of neoliberalism was ushered in by Friedrich Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom. Margaret Thatcher used to wave it. It was her favorite book. The get government out of the way, everything should be free market, anything else is the road to slavery, to serfdom. So Joe Stiglitz said, right, it's over. Didn't work. We've had that experiment, 40 years of neoliberalism. It's finished. It's over. Now we need the road to freedom, but not freedom of the libertarian right, but freedom, the kind of freedom we're talking about, the kind of freedom that has brought you here today, the freedom for every single person to lead a life they have reason to value. That's the freedom that we want to create. Freedom for every person in Newcastle to lead a life they have reason to value, so that this young person's promise for the future is delivered on. I get asked, are you optimistic? And as somebody pointed out to me, optimism implies certainty, as does pessimism. Optimism implies you know things are going to get better. Pessimism, you know things are going to get worse. Hope is something different. Hope is in a way the opposite of fear. We hope things will get better. And the level of uncertainty in that means that we, all of us, can make a difference. We need to be inspired by hope that we can reduce these unfair inequalities in health and well-being. Raymond Williams said, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. Thank you.